This boy got a 0 in his exams, feared going home to a co-ed double, so destroys the paper straight away. Back at home, his mother asks him how he did in the exam. The boy didn't even dare to raise his head, blows milk and pretends not to hear. At that moment, the boy's schoolteacher brother comes home, pulling out his exam paper. He said to his mother with regret, "I didn't do so well in this exam." He had only scored 2 points more than second in his grade. Then, he looked at his brother. The next day in class, the teacher saw the boy staring out of the window, so she asked him to read aloud from the textbook. But the boy said that the letters in the book were dancing. The teacher obviously did not believe him. She asked him to read out the dancing letters on purpose. The result: the boy's name is Ethan. This is not the first time he has been thrown out of class, but he wasn't actually lying. The letters do dance in his eyes. It's called dyslexia. He sees words in mirror image. For example, the letter B would appear to him as a D. The famous scientist Albert Einstein had the same condition when he was a young boy. In fact, Ethan was also a genius with an incredible imagination. In particular, he had a talent for drawing bold colors. His ideas were wildly imaginative. Many things that look ordinary to us, he sees things in a different light. Even some of the more complex puzzles he can put together with ease. But such a bright child, but he can't read or write. Having fed his test paper to the dog yesterday, Ethan was afraid of being punished by his teacher again. At the age of 8, he chose to skip school. He spent the day playing alone on the streets. When his father heard the news, he was furious and slapped him across the face. He said that if he didn't study properly again, he would send him to a military school. But the new exams soon started again. All the students were answering the questions in an orderly fashion. Only Ethan's mind was shining. Faced with 3 times 9 equals what? He imagined himself as a cosmic warrior, dragging the Earth star number 3, and colliding with Pluto 9. In the end, the planet Earth won. And so the answer is 3 times 9 equals 3. When he had finished the first question, and the exam time was over, the next day his parents were invited to school for tea. Ethan got a 0 every time. All the teachers said there was nothing they could do. The headmaster even said that the child might be mentally handicapped. He was recommended to be transferred to a special school as soon as possible, to avoid delaying his best treatment. The father, however, felt that his son's attitude to school was the problem, because no matter how you look at it, Ethan didn't look like he had an IQ problem. So, despite his son's objections, he sent him to a military school. The headmaster of the school assured his father with his bare hands, even if Ethan was the strongest of wild horses, he would soon be tamed. And so it was. Ethan was left alone at the school by his parents. But not only did the new environment not help him at all, instead, the absence of his parents, he felt more and more alone. He began to hate everything about it, even his favorite class, art. He was not interested in it at all. He would rather be punished by the teacher again and again. He chose to remain silent, because no one would believe. Gradually, he also began to close himself off inside. Not only did his academic performance not improve half as much, instead, they were worse than ever. Until this day, there was a new art teacher at school, Nick, and it was his presence. It was his presence that turned Ethan's life upside down. Nick's unique teaching style, he quickly became involved with the students. And naturally, he noticed there was a boy in the classroom who had been sulking. He gave everyone a blank piece of paper. There was no requirement to let the students draw freely. Everyone was carefully sketching what they wanted to do. Ethan was the only one staring at the paper in silence. If another teacher had seen him like this, I'm sure he'd have been punished again. Kenrick's face was full of concern. He asked Ethan if he didn't like drawing, but it was as if Ethan hadn't heard him. He still didn't say a word. This made Nick feel strange. He wondered why the boy looked so preoccupied at such a young age. In the evening, his mother called. She told him she was going to watch her brother's game this weekend, so he couldn't come to school to see him. Ethan didn't answer. With tears in his eyes, he turned and left silently. He knew that his parents were starting to move away from him too. It was a lonely weekend at school. That day in class, Ethan was again called to the door by his teacher to kneel. Nick, who was passing by, happened to see him. He went up to Ethan and asked him what was wrong. To his surprise, Ethan's eyes were filled with fear. Nick was puzzled. What could have happened? What could have happened to a child like this? He went to Ethan's table to find out. He was very smart. He could see early on that Ethan had a reading and writing problem. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't remember a complete word. After hearing what his tablemate said, Nick suddenly realized something. He rushed to his office to find Ethan's workbook. After a closer look, he realized it wasn't that the boy couldn't write. It was that he had written all the letters in mirror image. What he saw in his vision was different from what others saw. No one could understand what he had written. At that moment, he finally understood why Ethan was the way he was. Every Every day, he was questioned by his parents and teachers. He even had to put up with the ridicule of his classmates. Under such pressure, it was easy for an adult to break down, not to mention an 8-year-old child. Nick was very concerned about Ethan's situation. He didn't hesitate to visit Ethan's parents. It was here he saw a different side to the boy. That was Ethan's great talent for drawing, the ease of his brushwork, the boldness of his coloring. It's hard to see how an 8-year-old could have done it. He even drew himself a page-turning comic of his family drifting apart. Nick couldn't imagine how much this child has been through. He explained in detail to Ethan's parents about dyslexia, but the father was as stubborn as ever. He thought his son just had a bad attitude towards school. Nick was furious. He took out a toy box from home. He asked his father to read out the words on it.
ये कैसे पढ़ सकता हूँ? ये तो चाइनीज में।
अरे कोशिश तो कीजिए, चलिए ध्यान दीजिए।
क्या बेकार की बात कर रहे हैं? मैं कैसे पढ़ सकता हूँ?
ये बदतमीजी कर रहे हैं। आपका रवैया ठीक नहीं है। ये आप शैतानी कर रहे हैं।
In a flash, his father woke up from his dream. What was happening at that moment? Isn't that what his son is experiencing? The boy couldn't read the words, but he had always thought he had an attitude problem. The next day, Nick returned to school and told the class that he was going to tell them a story. There was once a boy. He didn't like to read, and he didn't like to write. Whenever he encountered a word, he was in danger. It felt like all the letters of the alphabet were dancing around. As a result, his academic performance was very poor. His classmates and teachers used to tease him. Ethan was so nervous, thinking Nick was talking about him. But the next moment, Nick held up a picture and said, "That boy was Albert Einstein." His theory of relativity, which he later developed, shocked the world. And it wasn't just Einstein. Leonardo da Vinci, for example, Picasso, Disney, all of these geniuses suffered from severe dyslexia as children. People around them didn't understand them. They were treated like illiterates. But when they grew up, they became world changers. After hearing these words, after class, Nick called out to Ethan to tell him that there was actually another person who had dyslexia too. But the teacher hadn't mentioned it earlier, and that person was the teacher himself. Ethan couldn't believe it. Nick had this problem as a child. He wanted to show Ethan that he wasn't alone in this world. There were many people who had the same experience as him, but none of them ever gave up on themselves. On this day, the class organized an activity outside the school. Ethan built a boat with mechanical movement. Watching the boat sail itself through the lake, the teacher and classmates complimented him, although Ethan was shy and hid in the crowd. But he was able to share what he had made. It was proof that his heart was opening up. Since then, Nick has been tutoring Ethan every day after school, teaching him how to spell correctly by drawing, using jumping jacks to work on his arithmetic skills. Gradually, Ethan was able to recognize the shapes of all the letters. Occasionally, he could even read simple sentences. He regained his love of learning. He made an extra effort. He is no longer the depressed person he was before. In order to help Ethan build up his self-confidence, Nick lobbied the headmaster to hold a drawing competition at the end of term. And just as that was happening, Ethan's father was on a business trip and happened to be passing by the school. He saw his son reading aloud from the competition, and remembering that he had been wrong about his son, the old father was in tears of shame. The day of the competition came and went. Ethan woke up early before dawn. He went to the river alone. He stayed there for 2 hours. Soon the competition began. The students were working hard on their paintings. Some teachers joined the competition, but Ethan didn't show up yet. Nick was a bit anxious. It was a long time before the competition started. It was only after a long time that Ethan arrived. Nick handed him a piece of paper. Ethan found a secluded spot and sat down. He began to use his painting talent to the fullest. The colors under his brush seemed to come to life. Soon after, the competition was over. Nick looked at Ethan's finished work. It was his first time in the limelight by the river. At the break of dawn, a boy sits alone by the river and stares. Flowers, birds, and trees, and the water rushing by. It was a true reflection of his inner world. And soon, the headmaster announced the final results. One boy had beaten all the teachers. He'd beaten all the teachers.
9 साल का ईशान नंद किशोर अवस्थी
On the podium, looking down at the thunderous applause. It was the first time that Ethan had been recognized by so many people. At this moment, he couldn't hold back. With tears streaming down his face, he ran to Nick. You could say, if Nick hadn't been there, he would not be where he is today. And in the middle of the game, Nick also completed a painting of. In his painting, Ethan, with a big smile, he's shining brightly. To others, Ethan may seem like an anomaly, but in Nick's eyes, he was the brightest morning star in the sky. No one is born strong, and no one is born stupid. May every child on the road to adulthood, may every child grow up with a teacher like Nick, and may parents, while teaching their children, to observe them more carefully. Let them have a healthy